Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. Hi, I'm Dave Brown alongside Joeita Gupta and Michelle McQuigge. Let's get into our next topic. The topic of China was discussed at the Three Amigos Summit at the White House earlier this month. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was non-committal when asked whether the federal government would consider a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics, which U.S. President Joe Biden is considering. Trudeau says Canada is speaking with global partners about how to approach the games in China. In the time since, Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai went missing after accusing a high-ranking Chinese official of sexual misconduct. Although Peng has seemingly reappeared, questions remain about human rights concerns faced by athletes and delegations heading to the Winter Games. Michelle, you want us to explore this. Why?
Because I find this to be an interesting topic and one that I thought we'd get the jump on a little bit. This is definitely going to gain rather than lose traction in the weeks to come. We're not that far away from Beijing. Crazily
99 days till the start of the games.
No one's counting around here. Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, yes, we just wrapped up a summer games, but the Winter Games are 99 days off, and there are going to be some decisions made and a lot of talk about how Canada should be proceeding in this case. A diplomatic boycott, it's worth specifying the difference a little bit here. Well, what the U.S. said it's considering is just to not send any official representation. So if they go through with the diplomatic boycott, the President Biden would not be there, Kamala Harris, Vice President, would not be there. There would be no high-profile dignitaries on hand to sort of mark this as an official, exciting diplomatic occasion. But the athletes would all still go. That's what some people are now pushing for Canada to follow suit and do, and say that would send a message to China that their human rights treatment of past detainees, ethnic Muslims in the country, a whole number of other people are not going to be tolerated and not going to be put up with. But there is no call at this point to have the athletes boycott this. Lots of room for people to take different positions, and I think we're going to see them all in the months to come. And the government will have to be making a decision at some point. It's one of those things that they're already starting to face questions from the likes of us on what decision is going to be made. So I think this is going to be one to watch in the next few weeks.
It seems that a diplomatic boycott is sort of a half measure that seems to be more posturing than anything else that comes with limited consequences. Oh, no, we won't go to your cocktail party. It's like, yeah, congratulations. That's not really a statement. But Joeita, what do you think of the idea of a diplomatic boycott?
Well, I'm saving my really hot take for later on in the segment, but I would have to generally agree with the principle that it is a bit of a half measure. It is. Let's be fair. It's not preventing athletes from competing when you introduce a diplomatic boycott. So it is a symbolic gesture. It's worth asking, what is this actually going to accomplish in terms of changing foreign policy? It probably likely won't affect any change, to be perfectly honest with you, in terms of how China conducts itself on the world stage. But I want to sort of bring in another element here, which is that if you really stop to think about it, the IOC has a really dodgy history of making decisions to award the games to host cities in countries with shaky track records when it comes to human rights issues. Let's just put it that way. Now, I'm going to preface the next bit by saying that I understand that these two situations are not the same, i.e. what's happening or has happened recently in China is nowhere near comparable to the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin, Germany. But when people think back to the pomp and ceremony of the 1936 Berlin Games, people are ashamed of the fact that the world participated in that. So the thing that I really want us to think about, and the tension in the story for me, is obviously the push and pull between politics and sports. This idea that we're just, for people who feel that it's just sports and politics and sports don't need to mix, the reality is that even this decision, even if it is a half measure, is alluding to the fact that there is a broader context. And I think that the point that I want to make here, which is a little bit removed from what you're asking, but I think is nonetheless important to consider, is who's holding the IOC accountable in terms of awarding these bids to cities and host countries with dubious track records, to say the least. And bear in mind, more and more, China's hosted the Winter Games at least twice now. This is now the second time in, 15 years that they're hosting it?
It was the Summer Games in 2008.
The Summer Game in 2008. So they've been able to host these games many times. And bear in mind that most other countries, most countries are backing out of the bidding process. They don't want to get involved with the Olympics. So that's because they're so expensive. So there is a piece around holding the IOC accountable here as well, which I don't think we're really getting to talk about, but maybe that is another part of the conversation.
There are certainly other branches of accountability we can talk about, whether it's the IOC, whether it's broadcasters, advertising partners. There's all kinds of money trails we can follow here. But Michelle, I want to give you the opportunity, because you did a great job of defining what the diplomatic boycott is, but what do you think of the overall idea?
Well, I think everyone agrees that it is definitely a half measure. A full boycott has a lot of active detractors because they're saying the athletes have trained all this time, and it's their regimen and their hopes and dreams should not be influenced by political wrangling of the day. They started on this journey well before a lot of these issues came to light in the first place. So that's what people who think that this is the best compromise approach should say. Other people feel that we have to go further and that we have to be all in and either allow no one to go or allow everyone to go, athletes and diplomats alike. It's definitely a thorny issue, and I don't see Canada doesn't tend to move in isolation on these things. And I think a diplomatic boycott in particular would only have some kind of weight if it were to be undertaken by a number of people. And I suspect Canada on its own would not be influential enough to really drive that movement. So I think a lot of what my educated guess is that much of Canada will decide to do will be dictated by what goes on in the United States. I also did read a line that I thought was interesting in terms of at least considering or thinking about when having these conversations. And that's the fact that, yes, a diplomatic boycott would be symbolic in nature, as Joeita quite rightly pointed out. But as seasoned diplomats themselves have said, a lot of diplomacy is itself symbolic, and much of diplomacy have to center around gestures that have meaning rather than concrete actions along the lines of what we're talking about here. So it is a really quite the thicket to navigate.
And it was a great line. You have to quote that line. It's 80% diplomacy and 20% is armament and cold hard cash. I laughed when I read it. It was
yeah, it's a good line. It's and relevant here, I think.
Joeita, you alluded to it. You've got a hot take. I'm just going to open the doors and let you turn on the oven.
All right. Well, look, here's the thing. I mean, one of the fears that people have around a diplomatic boycott is that athletes will get caught in the crosshairs. And so it's either all or nothing is what people say. But here's the thing, but I want to sort of address this point about athletes getting taken hostage for one thing. I think we have to be really mindful that if China starts to take athletes hostage, they will never get awarded another game again. They'll never get to host an Olympics. They'll never get to host any sort of international event of any significance. What I do want to point out, though, and here's my hot take, is that even a complete Olympic boycott, that means you don't bring your diplomats, you don't let your athletes compete, that is your half measure. A diplomatic boycott is in fact a quarter measure. And the reason I say this is if you look at the 1984 boycott of the Los Angeles Olympics, and that was all the Eastern Bloc countries that were boycotting those games, it didn't actually make much difference to American foreign policy. The only instance where a boycott, I think, has been somewhat effective would be the 1976 Montreal Games, when a bunch of African countries pulled out of the games to protest apartheid in South Africa. So I really think that boycotts, for people who think that they are the be-all and end-all, are not the be-all and end-all. There's a bigger context here, and a diplomatic boycott really is, as you put it, Dave, whining and dining. We're not going to go to your cocktail party, and it's not really even a half measure. It's frankly just a quarter measure. It's saying we're doing something, but I don't think they're accomplishing much of anything.
Joeita, I accept your position that if the Chinese government abducted an athlete during the games, they may not ever get it again. But I mean, we're talking about a country that's been committing human rights abuses for decades now, including recently in the lens of the Uyghur Muslim population in the country. We're looking at all kinds of foreign aggression against Taiwan, which is something that it's been a big news story, but it's kind of been a little bit under the radar because it would take like an hour to explain to people exactly what's going on around Taiwan right now. I don't attach those kind of scruples to the IOC, and I also believe that when we're talking about someone like Peng Shuai, that's a professional tennis player. that was seemingly disappeared for nearly a week after accusing a high-ranking Chinese official of sexual assault. Joeita, I accept your premise, but I don't know if I all the way agree, because at the end of the day, it's about dollars and cents.
It is about dollars and cents. No, I don't disagree with you on that. Sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
But Michelle, I want to give you the option to sort of talk here about athlete safety in regards to the potential for athletes to get over there, whether it's athletes, coaches, delegations, whomever, who might find themselves in a sticky situation.
I'd be more inclined, I think, to take Joeita's part on this argument, but it can't be denied that the risks exist. I'm sure Michael Kovac and Michael Spavor did not expect any kind of detention when they were over there in their own professional capacities. But the fact is that China wants the world to let them in. They angle for seats at all the biggest tables and have them now. They're trying to get in on 5G networks in Western countries. There is a lot at stake, and I suspect that an act of open aggression against a Western country or one of its athletes would not lead to the kind of economic outcomes that they're after. So for that reason, I suspect that ultimately I would side with Joeita here, but there's no question that there are dangers, and this country does have quite a record of human rights abuses, and that can't be ignored.
I mean, I'd argue they're already so economically intertangled around the world, whether it be with Western nations or their new Silk Road initiative, where they're building ports and rail lines and all kinds of infrastructure around the world. They're already so economically intertangled. They could care less. They could really care less about what the United States thinks. Guys, I'm going to have to leave it there at this moment, but this is a really interesting topic, Michelle. Thanks for bringing it to us, and I bet you between now and February, we're probably going to approach some elements of this one yet again.
I was going to say, stay tuned. I think there's more coming here.
Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI TV, or download the podcast wherever you listen.